Hi, so much for coming. So thank you for coming. My name is Audrey. I'm from UW Madison. My name is Bella, and I go to the University of Vermont.
I'm Ben, I go to the University of Richmond.
I'm Julia. I go to the University of Vermont. I'm Emma. I go to UC Davis.
I'm Ben, I go to Madison.
Again, I also go to UW Madison.
I'm Sad, and I'm one of the designers. I'm proud. I'm the editor.
So we spent the last 3 weeks doing restoration field work, backpacking, and learning about the ecology of the greater Yellowstone area. And we're so excited to share our experiences with you. Thank you so much. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about what we did chronologically-ish and explain what we took out of it. So one of the first projects we participated in was working with Sasha, a local botanist who works with the School of Parks and Rec Restoration Project. And we spent the day weeding invasive mustard and cheatgrass. This was because the hillside was recently developed and a new water tanker was put in. This left the hill degraded with no vegetation and the soil was eroding. So Sasha's plan was to lay some native diverse seed mixes along the dirt. And they just needed a little help kickstarting their growth, and we were out there getting rid of any competition for them. And an essential theme to this course that was reflected early on was the question of what are we restoring to? Before this course, I would have said just restore it to what it was right before the disturbance. But after what we talked about, I've learned there are a ton of complexities and values that go into a restoration project. And success might look very different in terms of who is doing it, what their values are, and what the stakeholders are. And this type of restoration was really resonated with me because of how easy it was to implement. Native landscaping can save money, time, and water. And I want to mention that restoration can also be extremely adaptable. So for an example, at the Jungle Pass, where the water tanker was installed, Sasha briefly talked about how in the same, she briefly talked about in terms of a restoration project, she may implement native seeds that are more drought resistant in anticipation of climate change. And I think that is a great way of moving forward. And going forward, I really want to explore the possibility of expanding these practices to UW-Madison in particular, and see what kind of impact it can have on a small scale, like local pollinators or biodiversity, or a large scale, and how it can reduce the campus's carbon footprint. I'm extremely thankful to this course and everything we've learned. It gave me a lot of confidence that this is my passion and I can pursue what I love. And I was tested academically, mentally, physically, and I came out so much stronger. And learning in such beautiful places and talking to real people, building real relationships around the ecosystem was an experience of a lifetime, and I will always cherish it. So next, I'm going to hand it over to Bella, and she'll talk about mountain hiking.
Thanks, Audrey. So next, we visited the Mount Hagen Wildlife Management Area. And within the first day of us getting there, we summited Sugarloaf Mountain, which was just really awesome because it instilled this, I don't know. It instilled this confidence in the group that was just so crucial. It was in the early days of our trip, and we had a lot of physically challenging days ahead of us. So just to validate that we were capable of doing this, I think was just such a monumental moment for this group. Not only that, but it gave us such an interesting perspective on the land. Looking at it from a bird's eye view, you could really see that there was a fluctuation between degradation and stewardship on this land, which we then got educated on by the Big Hole Watershed Committee. Ben's going to talk to y'all about some of the field work that we did for them.
So with the Big Hole Watershed Committee, we made Pivo mimicry dams with Pedro, who was a group leader, and basically what these entailed, we were using like willows, and you like weave those in these twin stakes, and then you would add mud to that, and then the point was that it kind of like slow down the water, and then deepen it, and then kind of spread out things. So the point for that would be is they would like reduce like water cycling and like nutrient like recycling and like a lot of other ecosystem services that are like vital in the system. So why are we making these dams when beavers exist? Back in the 1800s, there was this massive trend for fur trading. You had your like huge glass types go out, kill all the beaver, make all the profits, and then the fad ended. And then after that, you basically had no beaver left on the landscape. You still have wetlands, but over time, as the beaver were gone and I guess settlers moved into this frontier, you kind of had this land develop. So then you had a species who was like extirpated from the region, and their habitat was being destroyed. So they couldn't really, I guess, reroute into their like habitat. But basically, what we were doing is we were kind of remaking their dams for them and restoring their ecosystem, which is the wetlands, allowing them, as I said before, to like have the services back, like I guess nutrient cycling and water filtration, which are also very vital for us. And the goal is that now that the services are back and this ecosystem is back, the beavers will be back, and that's our main goal with that. And in a broader sense, what I learned from the beaver, I guess, mimicry project is that all restoration doesn't have to be super high tech and involved, and that restoration doesn't mean humans using their power and knowledge and intelligence to fix nature, but to give nature the tools to fix itself. And that was just a really cool lesson for me.
Yeah. I actually came from an entirely different perspective going into this course. Throughout my pursuit of higher education, I have been taught that restoration work is meant to be low tech and low human intervention, allowing the ecosystem to kind of restore itself and just giving it that kickstart. And the Big Hole Watershed Committee actually challenged and changed my perspective regarding that. That was through a tour of the different sites, the restoration sites that they had in the Mount Hagen management area. So the first place that we went to, we went back to Sugarloaf Mountain, which is where we were the day prior. And we just were educated on the land use of that area. So Arco Mining, which is responsible for the Anaconda Smelter and the Berkeley Pit in Butte, if there are any locals who are familiar with those. Had a really heavy presence on this land. Not only did the smoke from the Anaconda smelter deposit really heavy metals and toxic chemicals all over the land in Mount Hagen management area, but they also had an extensive logging industry on Sugarloaf Mountain, which just cleared the vegetation from the face of it. And this clearing of vegetation led to mass erosion, which led to deep gullies and wide gullies running all down the mountain. Inevitably, the sediment flowed into a stream that was at the base of that mountain called California Creek, which led to it being heavily incised, creating very turbid water and practically decimating nesting environments that are crucial for the wildlife that live in those streams. The work that Big Hole Watershed Committee did on that mountain completely changed the disrupted area before. Not only did they replant vegetation at the top of the Bear Ridgeline, which not only just instilled that native seed bank again, but also acted as like an anchor for the sediment to further prevent any runoff. They also naturally plugged the gullies with downed trees that were surrounding the area to allow the gully to almost fill in itself. As sediment ran down those gullies, it would be caught by those plugs and just slowly over time just keep on filling up. At the base of that gully, there was a large basin that was tarp lined with some rocks, and that was just catching any leftover sediment that didn't get plugged up by the plugs. Additionally, they added beaver dam analogs all throughout California Creek, which then flooded the stream beds, raised the groundwater table, and restored that wetland community. In contrast to that, immediately after, we headed over to French Gulch, which is where the first gold was struck in Montana, which is really cool, but led to a very heavy mining project there, which turned a naturally meandering stream into a straight shot for about 3 miles, completely cleared of any wildlife, with these large piles of sediment on the side of it. And upon a Big Hole Watershed Committee coming into that area, they found a few species like sagebush and aspen pioneering themselves onto those piles, those mounds. However, they noticed that this wasn't a naturally functioning ecosystem. Pedro and the Big Hole Watershed Committee could have decided to do a low-tech, low human intervention restoration project, as they did with Sugarloaf, and just allow the ecosystem to restore itself after giving it that kickstart. However, they realized that that would not efficiently restore ecosystem function. So they were faced with a hard decision, and they decided to excavate and fill in that entire area, work with hydraulic engineers to build an entirely new stream, restock it, revegetate it, and turn it back to almost what it historically was. And furthermore, after working with fish biologists, they decided that they wanted this to be a native fishery. So then they killed all of the non-native fish species within this area. And so the thing is, the stark contrast between restoration efforts between Sugarloaf Mountain and French Gulch completely shattered my preconceived notions regarding restoration. I learned that there is no right or wrong in restoration, and that there's no blueprint to follow, no matter the similarities in ecosystems. While low human intervention may be what you strive for in certain situations, other times you have to be able to assess the situation and determine the correct measures for restoring resiliency. While all restoration strives to restore ecosystem function, there's a spectrum of actions that one can take to do so. Now on to Julia to talk to you guys about our time in the Snowcrest Mountain region.
Thanks, Bo. So as you can tell, we were, for the first at least week of this course, we were really getting our hands dirty. A lot of field work, a lot of hot days. So our group ended up taking a 4-day backpacking excursion into the Snowcrest Mountains. We thought it was going to be relaxing. Yeah. We thought it was going to be relaxing. We were going to get to connect with nature. Unfortunately, it rained the whole time. We were freezing, we were shivering. But despite all of that, honestly, this part of the trip was a really big highlight for me. First off, we saw Pika, which is like my favorite of the whole time. But also, we really got time to grow and connect as a group, even though we were cold, even though we were tired and upset. This is us dancing when sun finally came out. We were able to just connect with each other and really build a dynamic, but also we got a lot of time to connect with the landscape. Snowcrest Mountains are beautiful. We were hiking through this gorgeous valley that was like surrounded by these coniferous top mountains. And another way that we decided to connect with the land is this is where we decided to do our plant study, which was kind of mentioned in the presentation before us, but for a quick overview. Basically what the plant study was is that each of us found a plant that we had never seen before, or we had seen in passing but didn't really know what it was. We then sat with that plant and kind of just observed it. It was sitting in the sun for like 2 hours, just looking at this tiny plant on the ground. Anybody walking by us would have thought we were crazy. But we really just sat and observed and kind of made speculations about how this plant might be interacting with the other plants around it and the ecology of this landscape. Even all of us gave our plants cute little names. And then after that hour, we then turned to books and kind of figured out what science called the plants that we were looking at. What I loved about this project was the emphasis on like connecting to an individual on a personal level. As an undergraduate, I'm studying wildlife biology and forestry. And for those of you who know those practices, it's all based in defining and classifying organisms. Dendrology, to ornithology, mammalogy, you name it. These practices really like to put species within a box, and they really have to kind of define some characteristics within that box, and anything outside of it is labeled as adverse or unnatural. For example,
if there was a bird, we talked a lot about the Clark's nutcracker. They love the pine cone nuts, but if you saw Clark's nutcracker on the ground looking at berries on a trail right in front of you, would that be considered a different species? Just because it's not conforming to what its species is normally supposed to do? Personally, I don't think so. And so putting these species in a box to me is a very unproductive way of approaching ecological practices. As some of you know, Robin Kimber in her book Braiding Sweetgrass talks a lot about learning from the landscape and getting to know the landscape on an individual level. And she really emphasizes listening to what's around you. And that can look and seem different to everybody. To me personally, it's just about giving time to what's around us, to look at the plant that's at your feet, to hear the birds around you, and to smell the smell that the flowers are giving off. I kind of try to give the same attention to a living thing that I would somebody new I'm meeting at a coffee shop for the first time. It really just gives us the chance to kind of approach these individuals with no like predetermined judgments. So my perspective throughout this course has really changed. From using species to define an individual, as opposed to using an individual to enrich my understandings of the unique and infinite characteristics that a species can have. And with that, I feel like connecting and understanding individuals is a crucial part of the restoration ecology that we were talking about, and really understanding these crazy complex systems. If we don't know the parts, how will we ever understand the whole of what we're looking at? And in turn of that, how can we hope to restore a landscape without a deep and specific understanding of what's in front of us? We really just have to begin with knowledge. We can't walk onto a site and decide, oh, I'm going to do this after I've looked at it for 5 minutes. We really have to understand what's in front of us, and we have to learn, and not only learn like at odds with this landscape, but we have to learn from it. For example, if you come up on a wetland site, not all wetland sites that you're going to come up on are the same. Not all forests or mountainsides or streams are the same. So I really think that as humans, we tend to generalize and we create these predetermined judgments. But I invite you to question the confines of what species characteristics really are, and to maybe stop and listen to what's around you, and in general, just to be open to listening, be open to giving time. So through the future, I am going to take on these perspectives through my career, hopefully, with respect. Just respect for what's around me and respect for the perspectives of individuals. And I will try as hard as I can to not rely solely on field guides when learning what is around me. So I'm going to turn it over to Emma.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, so after returning from the Snowgrass Mountain Range, we headed back to front country. We went to Upper Red Rocks Lakes Wildlife Refuge to continue more restoration work. The restoration work we did was with a man named Cortez. He worked as the deputy refuge manager for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. Cortez invited us to help with a project to measure populations of moose species on the Elk Creek wetland. Essentially, Cortez had observed a lot of overgrazing of willow shrubs in this wetland. And he came to the conclusion that this was likely because the moose populations were overpopulated and thus in need of control. Cortez invited us to essentially, in order to measure the scale of this overpopulation, he invited us to build a moose exclosure, which was essentially building first transferring one exclosure, which was a fenced out area of willows, and taking it down and rebuilding it at a different site, which essentially allowed the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services to measure moose grazing and decide whether or not this overgrazing was an issue. And this overgrazing likely was an issue. Based off Cortez's observations, it was likely that moose were overpopulating the area. And the US Fish and Wildlife Services strategy to mitigate the issues that could come with that, meaning that moose could overgraze the willows, causing the entire ecosystem to suffer. Specifically species that depend on these willow plants, like migrating birds, and also the moose as they begin to starve and they hit their carrying capacity and their populations eventually lessen. Thus, the strategy to mitigate this issue was by the US Fish and Wildlife Services was to hand out more hunting permits if it became true that the moose were overpopulating the area. Easy solution, right? Well, it wasn't so easy for me. As a vegetarian and a non-hunter, this restoration project really challenged me. You know, we got to the site and I wondered, like, is this restoration? Is this restoration if what we're doing is just to benefit humans? If it is true that the moose are overpopulated, it really challenged my values and what I like stand for. Yeah, I also questioned exactly why the moose were overpopulating the area, and Cortez explained to us that this was because predation rates were much lower than they have been in the past, which is essentially because we have overhunted wolves and grizzly bears. And so predation is much lower and the moose are just not being, like their populations aren't being controlled by these predator species. I realized that US Fish and Wildlife Services was acting off of its own objectives and values as an organization, which could easily differ from mine. I'm not here to say that this project, I'm not here to say that this project was good or bad. I'm here to say that it's complicated. Restoration is an extremely nuanced field and it's very value-weighted, which is something I realized over the course of this course. And yeah, I realized that human values play a huge role in how we choose to restore land and how we choose to strategize why the ways in which we restore this land. Like, in my opinion, I would likely go about this issue by maybe reintegrating predators into the area and actually tackling why these predators were not hunting moose. But I think that in doing this project and working with someone who has different values and working with an organization with different values, I was able to really realize what I value and what kind of restoration work I want to be a part of in the future. So I believe it's extremely important to reconsider what we value and what movements we want to stand for. So I kind of want to ask the audience kind of a rhetorical question: what do you value? And have you taken time to consider if your actions, big or small, align with the larger impact you want to have? I urge you all to continue challenging yourselves to discover where your values lie, as I have discovered so much about myself and my own goals in doing so. And I believe that in doing this restoration ecology course, I have had, and having like such amazing instructors, I've had the opportunity to question these values that I likely would not have had the opportunity to do so before. And for that, I'm just immensely grateful. And now Leo is going to talk about our experiences when we started backpacking in Yellowstone.
Thank you, Ellen. So the next part of our trip, we went to Yellowstone National Park. We explored the Lamar Valley and then backpacked through the Pelican area. And so some questions that seem especially pertinent from our readings is, what is wilderness? How do we define wilderness? The 1964 Wilderness Act defines wilderness as wilderness is hereby recognized as an area where humans or visitors and do not remain. And these guidelines are especially important in helping determine what areas are protected. So under this definition, is Yellowstone considered wilderness? It seems so. As we drove in, we saw herds of buffalo roaming, we saw mountains and rivers, and forests and prairies. But then upon thinking about this further, it became a little murkier. What about us driving through the park? What about all the personnel and tourists in the park? What about people who lived here before they were forcibly removed from it? Because of this conservation model, this land is protected. The land outside it, such as West Yellowstone, that developed to an extreme degree to allow tourists in the land. In addition, buffalo outside the park were hunted to near extinction, and so today they're not allowed to roam in the range that they historically have. And so, under this conservation model that Yellowstone follows, doesn't seem very sustainable. It's at odds with humanity. In order for a place to be natural, it can be in it, and that doesn't seem to work itself for a very sustainable future. So then that begs the question, what does a sustainable model of human and nature interaction look like? First, I want to recognize that indigenous people have followed a model that in which they, they sustain their land. They've done this since time immemorial. I think a really important aspect of this is learning from the land and through learning about the land. So for us to be going to that, we had to use roads and other infrastructure, which was human development in the park. But because of that infrastructure, we were able to actually the land. We learned a lot, and we developed a relationship with the land. And even though there were bears and bad smells, I generally felt very welcome there, and I did not feel like a visitor who was just passing through. And so I think for me, this trip was one step on the path away from humans just being visitors in the wilderness as defined by the Wilderness Act, and one step towards humans being a part of the ecosystem and interacting with it and developing relations with the land and not being above the ecosystem. Next up is Maria, who's going to talk about the Anderson Ranch.
All right, for the last portion of our trip, we stayed at Anderson Ranch, which is a generationally owned and family-oriented ranching community. The family who owns the ranch had a field near where we set up our camp, and that they didn't use any pesticides on. And so in exchange for letting us stay there, we helped them pull out all of the hound's tongue, which is a weed, out of all the chopped hay and put it onto a truck bed. Being able to complete this project for this ranch and the land was very gratifying. But in a way, it was different than all of the other field work that we had done, in the way that the motivation and values behind it were socially based, not environmentally based. On our second night there, the range rider, Ellery, came to our campsite and took part in our dinner. I thought it was super interesting to get a peek inside her job and her overall lifestyle. Ellery shared so much information with us on how a ranch just north of Yellowstone National Park coexists with grizzly bears and other predators. She told us that they train their cattle to circle up and protect their young when there is a threat, finding safety in numbers and imitating wild buffalo. Another tactic that's utilized by this range to manage these conflicts is by imitating wildebeest calving behavior. So their goal with this is to have their cattle camp at the same time as a nearby wild elk herd, so that the ranch's calves have a better chance of surviving and aren't such a large target of these predators. I think that my biggest takeaway from Ellery and the ranch dynamic that we experienced was understanding the range of different ranchers' views regarding ranching in a heavily predated natural area. This ranged from the more progressive ranchers being predators of a natural and vital part of our ecosystem that they need to learn how to coexist with, all the way to, on the other end, more conventional ranchers that see predators as a threat and a nuisance. This unique experience of seeing and hearing about these issues firsthand was so enlightening and helped me to understand the perspectives in this lifestyle a little bit more. This experience really resonated with me the most because I was raised in Wisconsin in a small town that was surrounded by dairy farms. So learning these perspectives about a different type of agricultural environment and in a completely different ecosystem was really interesting, and comparing it to the information that I already know. I really feel like this experience has let me in on the side of restoration ecology that I can fully connect to my roots, and I think it opens up a whole new possibility regarding future opportunities. So being able to complete this academic work and physical work in this unique space was truly a wonderful opportunity. Learning and understanding different perspectives and information out in a natural environment with breathtaking views really supplemented this entire experience. The education on restoration ecology and everything surrounding it that I received on this trip is unlike any other. The perspectives and tactics that I learned, I will carry with me into my professional career and personal life, and I'm so incredibly grateful for this organization, and I would do it again for repeat.
As we come to the end of this presentation, I would just like, and we would all just like to give a huge shout out to our amazing instructors. Without them, we wouldn't. And thank you so much for listening. Are there any questions from the audience?
I was just curious about your experience with Pedro. I'm just curious what that was.
All right, so we have a member of the audience that was curious about our experience with Pedro. Pedro, if you're watching this, we love you so much. Working with Pedro was such an interesting experience, especially as someone who I grew up in South Carolina. I'm not used to these kind of environments. I'm not even really used to environmental talk up until I went to the University of Vermont. So just finally getting out to the field and working with a professional like Pedro, who's so personable, yet also so knowledgeable and articulates what he knows so well, is so interesting and just such a cool experience. Pedro taught me so many things that just because of him are going to be tattooed into my brain forever. He is such a character. I honestly feel really bad for all of you out there in the audience who don't know who Pedro is. Pedro and the Big Pool Watershed Committee are just doing such great things in Montana. And I seriously am so grateful for the education and knowledge that he instilled upon us.
Yeah. Also, for some fun context, Pedro actually camped with us.
Yeah.
And he camped with us, and we do this little tradition where we have a dinner question at every dinner. And it was like about what was it? It was like overcoming a challenge in your childhood, and he shared about his childhood. It was so cool. It was so fun to meet somebody who was like a professional, but was willing to spend time with just some kids.
I think I'm going to together the different parts. I really like how you guys describe restoration. And I'm curious about, I suppose, is there ever limited restoration for human intervention and speed that hasn't been intervention? Is there ever limited? It's like too much intervention in terms of restoration. Would you say unusual?
It's actually like a big debate. Exciting. So what amount of development is required for something to be considered past restoration and then upon just pure redevelopment? And I would say that it's not going to be a line because that's really hard to draw, but it's more of a perspective shift because you have to understand people aren't just separate from nature, but a part of it. And when you think of it from that perspective, when you have these massive restoration projects, you're just helping natural systems as part of that system to be able to take themselves. But it's not the more development there is, it's not we're separate from nature, so it's not we're acting too much towards its benefit. Does that answer your question?
I'm curious, this may be a question of we adapt and it's founding, but I'm curious if you thought at all about urban ecology and what it means to create hydroponic cities or to create natural spaces of dense human habitation that are also as ecological as they could be.
So this is kind of reflected in the first work we did with Sasha. That is a neighborhood. They were right across the street from some houses. And while it wasn't densely in the city, it was still an example of restoration ecology in your backyard. restoration ecology can be virtually on any scale, and I think we didn't talk too much about a city example, because, you know, we were out in Montana, but I think there is so many opportunities, and the implementation of native landscapes in small cities or anything like that. That answers.
I just want to add, yeah, I do think it's like definitely a great point. We talked a lot about that. And also like another thing we talked about was just the idea of like preservation versus restoration. And kind of the idea of, do we preserve land and never interfere with it and allow land to be wild? Or do we create like a human, like nature relationship that is equally beneficial and representative of reciprocity? And I think that like building or creating restoration practices in urban environments is a great part of that. Not just restoring or preserving our natural lands and putting them aside as places that we go to recreate and to appreciate every once in a while, but actually implementing our relationship with the natural world in urban ecosystems and suburban or what have you.
Yeah. I guess the next one, the detail, interesting presentation, very good job. Next, wondering what, maybe the most important way you got that is for them to get the role, of course, your ideas.
I'm very, very passionately about this. It was like, what's the most important thing you got out of this, or that you couldn't get in like a traditional class? And I personally want to acknowledge like all of you who are here, who support Worthy, your work, what you are doing to support Worthy is so important. Worthy, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm a very big kinetic learner. Lecture halls are not for me. You could repeat a fact over and over and over to me, and it could go in one ear and out the other. And that's who I am. Like all of the things that we have learned on this course and the work that we have done, I will never be able to forget. And it's such a surreal feeling when you're out in the field and you're talking about a concept or you're talking about a theme, and then next thing you know, like, for example, we talked a lot about whitebark pine and mountain pine beetle predation. And it's just so interesting because we'll be talking about it, and then 5 seconds later, go on past a stand of whitebark pine that's been like eaten away by some mountain pine beetle. And it's just so cool to talk about the things that we're learning and then see them happen. You can't get that in a classroom, no matter how hard they try to emulate it. Thank you, Lord.
I also want to say, like, when I came to this course, I was coming here to go to Montana and to see beautiful things and to see animals. But honestly, as cheesy as it sounds, it was really about like the people. As going to a big university like the University of Vermont, it's huge lecture halls, as Bella said. And honestly, I don't know any of my professors, not at all. And also my classmates, I walk into class, put on, write down my notes, and walk out, you know, and then I do my homework and I pray to God that I remember it for the test. But in a structure like this, first off, we became like a family. Like I have made like some of my best friends on this course. Our instructors were basically our best friends too. It was just an incredible experience to not only connect with nature and to learn from it, but to learn from each other and to create a connection that, I mean, you guys are gonna be friends forever. So I also thank Worthy for that because it's really cool and incredible.
Thank you so much. Definitely, would you mind lifting the screen and just these closing remarks? Is that okay? It's it's not a big deal. Let's give it one more time for both. So, Bella, thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you for supporting, for being here, for hearing about our work. If you entered partway through and you don't know who I am, and you're like, who's this guy? Or if you do know who I am, I'm Matt, I'm Murphy's current executive director. And at the core of all of our work is our students. So if you're a Worthy alum, which now all of the students you heard from tonight, but a lot of the people in the room as well are Worthy alums, can you just raise your hand so we can see? People are not a Worthy alum. These are great folks tonight to ask, what did Worthy do for you? How has Worthy affected? Next, I just want to honor all the instructors who are in the room. I see a lot of friendly faces. So instructors, raise your hands. Thank you all so much for your work. We all know that it's not easy being in the field, so thank you. Next, I want to appreciate our office team, current, past, and all of them. So our current office team is Jesse, who's in the back. Joe, who's been managing our Zoom. Robin, who's our administrative coordinator, she's had to leave for the night. We do a huge round of applause. Gail, who's in the back. Gail, that's our current team that works in the office. There also are a number of other folks who have been in the office for the years of Worthy, namely Katie Nelson and Dave Morris, who have been. We also have two very important guests tonight who are former Worthy EPs. We have Nikki Fear, right there. We also have the board, who I'm just going to list out all of our board members who are spread around the room, and some are managing the keg in the other room. We'll have drink later. Caitlin Hepburn is our board chair. Christy McCann is our vice president. Helen Ralston Clemmer is our group treasurer. Ted Morrison, Marissa Kern, Peter McDonough, Dana Hood, Mark Sundin, Kevin Hood, Neil Swanson, and Grace Gardner is our current living. And I would be absolutely remiss to miss the founders, Matt Thomas, Tim Bechtold, and Dave Havlick, who had this dream 30 years ago to create an organization that does this kind of field work. So let's give a round of applause for our team. Years down in Colorado, and after studying the past 21 years ago. As some of you know in this room, Worthy has had a tough financial time over the last few years recovering from COVID. And I'm really proud to say that we started a pretty major fundraiser with a goal of raising $500,000 over the next 5 years. We kicked that work off about 3.5 weeks ago. Our first phase is to raise $100,000 by the end of August, $100,000 by the end of August. As of tonight, we are at $80,000 towards that project. Right here on the spot, Jake, say a few words. Jake's been one of our longtime Worthy supporters, supporter of the organization, and helped us kick off the campaign. So I'm going to turn it over to Jake for a moment.
Well, I'm totally blown away by the passions, the perspectives, and certainly the intellects that were offered tonight. And really, that Matt can come up here. I moved to Missoula in 1985, and attended the environmental studies program. So I've been here for going on 40 years now. And my upbringing in the environmental movement has been shaped by a lot of people that helped start working and that have kept the organization going. My family, were fortunate enough, through my father and my mother's work, to have a small family foundation, the Craddock Family Foundation. And so we really honored that we were able to give a $5,000 contribution to them. And money is part of the equation, but as you can see, it takes a lot more than money to sustain an organization like this. I will say that in terms of our goals with the Craddock Family Foundation, education, environment, and community, work meets all those goals. So check those off the list. I will also say that for me and for our family, my brother and my sister, my father's passed, my mom's still around, but for us, this means a lot because you're the next generation of leaders that are going to come and help us move, hopefully, the planet a little closer to sustainability. I would also say that thanks to Matt's leadership, and obviously my friend Gail, who I've known a long time, and of course, Matt passed. But I've known a lot of the instructors. I've known a lot of the people who've helped lift Worthy off the ground. And so it's really inspiring for me, you know, to see the organization continue. And I would say that please, if you haven't given a little donation, or if you haven't, you know, put some money, maybe want to enter into one of the raffles, one of the silent raffles, that would be awesome. Every little bit counts, but I know that we're going to get to that $100,000 by the end of the month. 2 weeks of time. So let's have one for Worthy.
Thank you, Jim. Here's our raffle basket. Where did that end up? Lauren, will you draw a name out of there? We have a couple of gift cards that were donated that we're just gonna pull names out of the raffle and go for. The first is a $25 gift card from Runner's Edge that was just donated by the owners of Runner's Edge. If you want to just pull a card and pull a name.
Yeah, it's gonna be pretty well.
We also have a $25 gift card that was donated by Altamino, which is right on Front Street. So we'll pull one more name for that.
Jesse C.
Well, we do have food and drinks in the other room. We have our silent auction that will be open until 8:30. At 8:30, we'll pull those bid sheets. If you are still around and you want to get in, you can watch it tonight. If not, we'll reach out and call you tomorrow and let you know that if you won the item. Make sure that your phone number is legible. I'm not going to tell you that you can bid for your friends, but whatever phone number, name, and bid is legible, we'll be calling them first. I want to say thanks to Tagneer Jelly, Vegan Pizza, and 10 Spoon Winery, as well as Great Bird Brewing, who all donated some of the food and drinks we can be enjoying tonight. So a big shout out to them. And a huge shout out, I just want to acknowledge Ron Erickson, who is a former EBST professor, who's made one of the first cornerstone gifts in our campaign. Ron gave a gift of $20,000 to kick off our fundraising this year. And there are numerous others in this room stretched to give to this campaign and to give to Worthy so the next 30 years can be even better. or at least as good as the last 30. We do amazing work and we so very much appreciate everything that everybody in this room gives and contributes to our community, to the organization, and mostly to our students. Let's give it up one more time for our student. And let's one more party.
Thank y'all so much for joining on Zoom. Really appreciate your presence and questions and your attention. Thank you too. Oh, thank you. Yeah. All right, thanks y'all.